What Lane is a collection of obsessions. Basically, Yasuyuki Ueda, the producer, was reading about various religions, seeing what worked. He had a fascination with the mind and body, as well as an interest in psychopathology stuff. Around the same period, people were isolating themselves in their room and cutting off contact with each other. This came to be known as the Hikikomori. Ueda wrote the Serial Experiments Lain video game. Chiaki J. Konaka wrote and directed the animated sequences for the game and later went on to write the television series. Yoshitashi Abe created the art for Lain. He also collaborated with Konaka on a one-shot manga. All these projects were overseen by producer Yasuyuki Ueda. Chiaki J. Konaka pushed the writing further into what Ueda described as cult-like culture, incorporating ideas such as global connecting electromagnetic fields, Freemasonry, and of course the aliens. The game was conceptualized first, followed by the television series. The anime aired on TV Tokyo, after which the game was released on PlayStation. A year later, the manga appeared as part of an art book. Lain in the television series and the game appears to be the same character placed into different narrative contexts. As a brief refresher, television Lain follows a girl who is contacted by a dead classmate and is invited to live forever in the Wired, a stand-in for the internet. From there, Lain becomes entangled in a plot involving secret societies, cult leaders, and aliens. She gains the ability to reverse time and manipulate memory, and the story ultimately ends with her becoming a kind of guardian angel to her friend. The game is different. It focuses on collecting orbiting nodes of data in order to uncover information, which contains diary entries and Lain's therapy sessions. There you learn about Lain and her therapist.
牛乳にも種類があるの？そうね。
One more thing, there are a lot of Lain videos about what Lain predicted. There are a lot of great videos on, like, social media and stuff like that. None of that is what I'm personally interested in. I'm interested in what Lain was commenting on in the year 1998. At the latter part of the 20th century, Japan, before they could realize it, became the new frontier of technology. But many people remained skeptical of the bright technological future being promised, given how it had been misused in such recent memory. Lain emerged only 50 years after the atomic bomb. Throughout Japanese media, technology isn't treated as purely good or purely bad. It is more like a double-edged sword. Lain's no different. Lain is looking for balance. In Lain, a barrier is breaking between the real world and the virtual world, which works well as an allegory for the tightrope Japan had to walk as they modernized. You see, Japan in the 20th century industrialized at lightning speeds, especially in electronics, becoming a global powerhouse in computing. But that success came with a cost, a society estranged from its own traditions. Major works of the Japanese cyberpunk genre metaphorize this loss of self and this adoption of technology as technology merges with the individual's body. Ghost in the Shell, Tetsuo the Iron Man, Akira, Serial Experiments Lain, all inherent imagery from this, and the atomic bomb. People are transformed into constantly evolving monsters, marked by burns and mutations, losing their sense of self. Lain is similar, but it deals more with the communal aspects that were lost in the isolation of modern-day life. Lain's splitting from her family and friends and her sense of self mirrors the splitting of the atom, framing the loss of everyday Japanese connection as equally destructive. This theme of interconnectivity also appears as a religious idea in several traditions, which we'll discuss later. It's one thing at a time. The episode titled Kids depicts experimentation on children whose psychic energy is harvested in a process that kills them in a blinding atomic light. Their bodies are reduced to shadows, and the scientists show no remorse in their pursuit of progress. Tachibana Labs, which most likely carried out these experiments, appears as an American CIA-aligned corporation, though the details are not entirely clear. Chiaki J. Konaka's film Defender similarly explores experimentation on children. The Wired functions as a metaphor for unchecked technology and the atomic bomb. The Wired is the technology that overlays the real world, and is depicted with bright light and deep shadow. The Wired looks this way for a few reasons. For one, it subverts Buddhist and Taoist art. I have a whole section on this, so we'll return to it. The high contrast white is reminiscent of the white light of the atomic bomb. This recalls people being reduced to burned outlines on walls and pavement. In a horror short that Konaka wrote years prior, these same shadows of children haunt a school stairway. It's very similar to the infamous atomic bomb steps. Producer Yasuyuki Ueda said in a fan meetup, "Basically, when I was growing up, American culture had a huge impact on the way I am now, and while I find American culture to be very interesting, there are some things that are very complex and hard for me to understand. The way Japan and America are now, we are on good terms, but there are still some things. There's a communication barrier that we cannot talk about. I wish we could go further into that. Many countries in Asia, the Second World War left a lot of scars. I assume that it will kind of put a cloud over this room, and I assume most of you are Americans. As for Japan, this generation has pretty much forgotten about it, because the new generation always wants to step forward." The writer Chiaki Konaka said that Americans can only grasp a kernel of what Lain is saying because it is, at its core, a Japanese story. Chiaki Konaka remarked on the surprising popularity of Lain in the West, saying it seems that half of the video packages are currently sold in America. "I'm waiting with delight that they may be surprised if they watch the 9th episode. That initial evaluation may change. I take this to mean that American viewers might change their opinion of Lain once they learn that the technology behind The Wired originated in an alien crash landing in America, and that this alien technology was repurposed by Vannevar Bush, one of the figures behind the Manhattan Project."
Even before the advent of computers, Vannevar Bush had already created the basis for our current multimedia explosion, while at the same time, he was leading the Manhattan Project atom bomb experiments.
J. Konaka uses the atomic bomb to suggest that The Wired and its real-world equivalent, the internet, are in the same lineage. He uses UFOs because this technology is alienating, and this shows that The Wired is foreign and alien technology, usurping and invisibly shaping Japanese identity. Through the research of this mad scientist, Masamiya Airi, tears a hole between The Wired and the real world, leaving Japan unable to separate real life from the false reality of their technologized self. People are changed into mindless zombies. The end goal of the Knights of Eastern Calculus is the Schumann resonance, which in turn globalizes everyone into a technological singularity. Japan forgets its past trouble with technology, including the bomb, and adopts technology that vaporizes its sense of self. Masamiya Airi goes on to construct a religion around this imported system. A cult leader guides Japan's populace, mainly its youth, towards an end-of-the-world prophecy that demands they sacrifice themselves for a networked, global singularity. This isn't just a metaphor for the internet or technological adoption, but a metaphor for a cultural hive mind.
Earth itself might be awakened when all humans on Earth become collectively networked and resonate at the same frequency.
Serial Experiments Lain is concerned with the loss of a Japanese sense of self in favor of a single globalized self.
The Earth itself would become a single neural network.
So throughout this essay, I'll be engaging with conservative perspectives I don't personally agree with, but that I believe the show expresses.
You see them on The Wired? No, a net pal isn't a friend. I mean, it shouldn't
Reiko's like an old lady sometimes, isn't she? Yeah, old lady.
Yeah, and so what if I am, huh?
Since the Meiji era, and more intensely from the 1950s onwards, Japan adopted American values and economic ideas in an effort to globalize, and it was done so quickly. Producer of Lain, Yasuyuki Ueda, is oddly confrontational in an American interview, saying, "American viewers will not understand this. I do not want them to understand this. This work is based on the sensitivity and values of the Japanese people. America is different from Japan. The work itself is a sort of cultural war against American culture and the American sense of values we adopted after World War II, so I want American people to react to this work." Some aspects of Westernization are alien and alienating to Japanese men in society, and Japan had to confront that, and that's a lot of what Lain is. But Chiaki Konaka's work is not about sitting still, it's about cultural preservation. Right now, that includes welcoming immigrants. Chiaki Konaka has written immigrant allegories such as Armitage 3, which honestly, it's not very good.
Yeah, that's right, I'm a monster. I'm the monster society created. I'm the thing they blame for recession and social problems. I'm the scapegoat.
After World War II, Tokyo had burned, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed. When Japan surrendered to the Allies, the emperor, once regarded as a living god, was forced to deny his divinity. The country was occupied by the United States until 1952 and reorganized along Western political and economic lines. The Conservative Party suppressed leftist opposition with CIA backing to align Japan firmly with American capitalism. Japan would not become Vietnam or China. It would be remade in the image of the West. Japan succeeded, and it succeeded because Japan studied American manufacturing practices and rebuilt its industrial base around them. It then refined and improved those American systems in ways that eventually surpassed the original models, maybe picking up a few scraps of UFO along the way. Again, in Lain, Masumi Airi took foreign innovations for his own research. Japan took American patents and research and models of industry and produced microchips, color televisions, and reliable cars. You probably own one. Yet, alongside this success, there was always an unease about what Japan was and what it meant to be Japanese. Post-Meiji, and especially after World War II, Western systems did not simply replace Japanese identity, nor did they remain separate from it. Instead, Western ideas were layered on existing traditions, creating an unstable sense of self.
I am me. I'm the only me, right? And there isn't any other me but me. Isn't that right?
Tetsuo the Iron Man adopts more and more technology until he becomes a monster. In Serial Experiments Lain, at least the video game, Lain continuously says she needs more data, while Japanese aesthetics would say desire leads to suffering, and attachment to novelty is a distraction from clarity. The Wired is depicted as frantic and overstimulating. Japanese aesthetics traditionally values calm. Lain becomes absorbed by this world of distraction, expanding her room and drifting further from genuine human connection. Connection is another religious theme we'll touch upon. It's not just about having friends, it's a literal religious concept. The 80s came to an end, and the economic bubble burst, and Japan entered a prolonged period of recession. The country was left to reflect on the past, the future, and what it meant to be a nation and human. There's a Shinto myth of Tachimamori, who journeys to the land of the Undying to retrieve a miraculous fruit to save his sick emperor. The fruit is called the Tachibana Orange. He goes across the ocean to the land of the Undying. He retrieves the fruit from the underworld, but after this enormous labor, he returns home to find that the emperor has already died. Rather than claiming immortality himself, Tachimamori offers the fruit at the emperor's tomb. He then dies of a broken heart. The journey succeeds, but the purpose is lost. So Japan reached outward to seize something transformative and wondrous, but upon return, the cultural body it was meant to preserve had already died. The Tachibana Computer Company gets its name from this immortal fruit, and parodies another fruit company, Apple, an immortal import from the land of the Undying. Tachimamori is also known as the god of fleeting sweetness. He was deified. Japanese culture traditionally values small, transient pleasures. When Lain goes shopping with her friends, Lain swallows her ice cream in a single motion.
I know, but... Hey, take it easy. You'll choke on it.
She says that she wants to build her computer rather than hang out with her friends. She then isolates herself. In background dialogue in Shibuya Station, Elaine's friend Juri mentions an all-you-can-eat ice cream buffet.
Go to that store we went to yesterday. They're having a 30-minute all-you-can-eat ice cream special today. But I'm really hungry.
Ice cream later reappears in the video game. It's paired explicitly with Americanization. Elaine's therapist, after studying abroad in America and eating apple pie, she no longer enjoys the taste of Japanese sweets, which makes sense. We Americans like our sugar. Our desserts are much sweeter.
があるので、手土産にアップルパイを作ってみた。最初は私も砂糖の塊かと思うほどの甘さになれなかったけど、今はこれくらい甘くないと物足りないもの。あんまりこの甘さに慣れてしまうと、日本に帰ったらケーキとか食べなくなりそう。少し控えないと太っちゃうし、たけしさんに嫌われちゃう。明日からまたダイエットかな。
There is a lot of stuff in Konaka's work that deals with sweets as a stand-in for excess. It's throughout his whole work, but I'll put a few examples on screen. It's a lot of that. In the credits, phrases appear such as no name, no nation, no race, no place, no position. We see Nippon, which means Japan, alongside the year 1912. In the first 30 seconds of the show, we can see anxieties about Japan's global position. 1912 is a reference to the year the Titanic sunk, something thought to be unsinkable, much like Japan's economy, before the 1991 collapse. The film Titanic came around the same time as Lain. 1912 also marks the end of the Meiji era, often remembered as the Golden Age. The 1980s functioned similarly, which is another Golden Age that has already passed. So, alien and alienating technology that came from the West. As Lain engages with more of this technology, Lain becomes increasingly more alien-looking.
Don't worry, Daddy. I'm still me, you know.
Sometimes I wonder.
This mirrors the crisis of Japanese adoption of technology away from the religious centers, and Japan and Lain change because of it. Layer 5 follows Lain's sister Mika. Her scenes are repeatedly interrupted by television static. A television is visible during dinner. When Mika witnesses a car crash, this is immediately followed by a news report depicting the same crash. This implies that Mika may be watching herself on television during dinner while simultaneously living through the events via the interconnectivity of the wired. This is not a standalone event. Lain's friends discussed this earlier in an earlier episode.
We saw someone actually die right in front of us, but we're acting like it's something we saw in some kind of a horror movie or something.
I know we were there last night. I know what I saw, but it didn't seem real.
While staring into a mirror, Mika remarked that she should be at home eating dinner with her parents. And in fact, she might be.
I usually have dinner with my mom and dad about now.
The cult of the Knights, headed by Masumi Airi, is initiated through symbols of westernization.
How about a date? What do you say?
When people parody American capitalism, they usually target Coca-Cola. First thing that comes to mind is Ozu's Late Spring. A shot of a Coca-Cola sign signals the presence of Western culture in post-war Japan, therefore alienation from one's own culture. When Lain's sister Mika is brainwashed into the Knights of Eastern Calculus, we'll explain why they have that name later. It's a math joke. We'll talk about math. Taro, a wannabe member of the Knights, initiates her by spilling Coca-Cola on her. Mika begins to hallucinate and sees a message on a blood-stained napkin. It reads, "When the other side is overcrowded, the dead will have no place to go," which echoes the tagline of the American zombie horror film Dawn of the Dead. When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Dawn of the Dead is a perfect thing to homage because it also uses zombies as a stand-in for consumerism.
What are they doing? Why did they come here?
Some kind of instinct, memory, what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
This message is written on a napkin advertisement for a loan company. In Japan, they sometimes give out ads on the packaging of tissues, like flyers. That's what this is. A loan company asking Mika to be a part of The Walking Dead. It's a joke. She's being Americanized. Sato Roan is on the napkin, which means sweet loans. But Sato is also a popular name. Similar to Tajimamori, whose whole thing was fleeting sweetness, not desire, a loan company would be one of the contributing factors to the recession occurring at the time. Japanese economics at the time modeled itself after the West in the bubble era, hoping for the same growth, taking out loans, buying, doing the capitalism, thus the recession. Mika escapes into a McDonald's stand-in, another default American brand. One of the biggest. She drinks like a little bit of McDonald's coffee, and then she hallucinates the words, "fulfill the prophecy." When asked what is the prophecy she has to fulfill, we hear a noise that sounds like a mirror or a glass shatter resonance sound, signaling that the prophecy is a change of identity.
What prophecy are you talking about?
The sound is a breaking of a mirror, because she soon stands by a mirror. It's important to note that Mika is a teenager who is sexually active. The episode starts with her putting on clothes, while her boyfriend, I assume it's her boyfriend, is in the room. She is staring into a mirror vacantly. An underlying anxiety here is that the influence of westernization has eroded traditional Japanese values, leading to perhaps teenagers becoming more morally permissive. At least that's one interpretation. Lain herself has alter ego outings to Siberia to do God knows what.
Ew, you're really going for that little schoolgirl look, aren't you?
That's fucking gross. It's insinuated that Lain's persona is doing some risky behavior. This is also subtext in the video game. Mika says that she saw Lain's imaginary friend at Siberia even before Lain steps foot into there. Mika sees Lain at Siberia, but we never see Mika. We see a girl who looks very similar to Mika. She dresses up in scantily clad clothing, most likely selling her body. She also sells drugs. One of the drugs being sold to a mass is down not with beer, but with a bottle of what looks like Coca-Cola. This is confirmed by some production art, although we never see Coca-Cola on the bottle for obvious reasons. Now, Mika cowers in the bathroom, another appearance of the mirror motif, and oddly enough, someone else is in the bathroom. Is that another Mika turning off the lights? A scene or two later, we cut to a dinner, and something is wrong here with the passing of tea. Something ritualistic and traditional feels more like a poisoning. The tea is framed in front of Mika and Lain's face. They are obscuring her identity with a traditional object of cultural identity. They're all together at dinner, which is unusual for them, but the dad's head is tilted towards the television set, and a neon light from the TV's image ripples across the liquid of the tea. Modernity is seeping in, tainting the sanctity of this traditional Japanese family. Lain was the first to be, I guess you could call, poisoned by this television set, reflecting off the dashi. That happens in episode 1. So real quick, cleanliness in Japanese aesthetics is hygiene, but also a form of spiritual and social order. We saw a symbol of this kind of uncleanliness with this tissue packet. Maintaining a clean space marks the sacred from the profane, the inside and outside. The separation of inside and outside is important thematically because it also applies to the wired. There is no inside or outside of the wired. Our virtual worlds and real worlds should be separate, but everything is intermingling. Lain's room is almost like a Frankenstein's lab, with computer cords spilling outside and inside the house. There's no order here. This traditional Shinto inside and outside symbol often appears in Chiaki J. Konaka's work. Shinto monks remove their footwear before entering temples, and this practice carries over in ordinary homes. This is why there is a designated place for shoes, followed by an elevated area where the rest of the house begins. When Arisu saves Lain from Masumi Airi, even before she enters the house, she removes her shoes. The house is dirty, Yet she still follows this ritual. This may seem minor, but it's important because she represents the societal roles of order, the very roles Lain herself has stepped away from.
Lain! You've always been sitting there quietly just watching me!
After Mika flees the McDonald's, she returns home and cowers in this Genkin, the threshold between outside from inside. There she sees a version of herself that has been replaced as if by a body snatcher. Something from the outside has entered within, and this thing has become her new identity. Lain briefly glimpses the old version of Mika, but only as something resembling a broken shard of glass or a broken shard of mirror that has been shadowed. We hear the same sound cue. The prophecy has been fulfilled.
It's nothing. It's nothing at all.
The shard of glass will later be an MIB enforcer's eye. He is blinded by a shard of mirror, which reflects cultural heritage, which then makes him adopt a single, uniform, globalized self. This forms an important eye motif here. Eyes and glasses often appear whited out, as if clouded by cataracts, or as if blinding them. Throughout the series, countless shots of eyes suggest either insight or ignorance or whatever. It's contextual.
And somebody or something wants this duplication to take place.
But when they're finished, what happens to our bodies?
I don't know. When the process is completed, probably the original is destroyed or disintegrates.
The invasion of the body snatchers is a story that is famously anti-communist, while Lain feels more anti-capitalist. While Chiaki Konaka seems to be, at least by the news sources that he subscribes to, is a anarcho-capitalist. The 1970s adaptation shares similar creature design. In Lain, a bloody napkin after a sexual encounter could refer to contracting a sexually transmitted disease or sickness or an infection. We are also talking about fears of promiscuity as a byproduct of modernity. STDs are things that are in the background of other Chiaki Konaka works, such as like monstrous parasites. Mika emerges as a new person, dressed in black and red. She spends the rest of the show sitting on the couch, watching television, adopting the same technological fetishization as Lain. Lain and Mika are red and black and red, similar to the black and white of the yin and yang symbols, and in line with the colors of the Wired.
Yes, but who are the Knights? They're the ones responsible for making the fake me, isn't that right?
Well, I'm not sure.
It's not impossible. They say you can trace the origin of the Knights of the Eastern Calculus all the way back to the Knights Templar.
Now, the cult, the Knights of Eastern Calculus, has several cultural references at once. First, they take their name from a little-known secret hacker group called the Knights of Lambda Calculus. Lambda Calculus is a computer programming term, okay? At its bare minimum, Lambda Calculus is about defining functions and applying them. You give a function an input, and it produces an output. It's about the transformation of expressions, okay? Lain's story is about transformation through other things. You have a Lain input, you have a function called the Wired, you have a wired Lain output. Lain is a change of expression. Normal calculus is also about change, usually when it comes to numbers or lines.
Just between you and me, let me tell you what's happening. What's beginning to take place in our society, without you ever being even vaguely conscious of it.
Eastern calculus is not a thing, but if it were real, it would be about the changing of the East. Knights are from the West. They're not samurai. They are a westernized function. The Knights evoke orders such as the Knights of the Round Table and the Knights Templar. Conspiracy theorists think they're still operating in secret, dictating world events. Probably not. During the production of Lain, there was a suicide cult called the Order of the Solar Temple. This may have inspired the Knights. They believed death would transport them to a higher spiritual realm, although there's no technology element in it like Lain. I'm not going to talk about them. It's really just depressing. The Knights of Eastern Calculus's logo is a navigator needle from Freemasonry, but its actuator arm looks similar to what you would see if you cracked open a hard drive. Don't do that. We also see a mountain on the logo, which is most likely the Japanese Mount Fuji. It will ruin your hard drive. Seriously, don't do that. The logo is also a compass, symbolizing navigation, perhaps. Navigating from Mount Fuji, I guess, maybe.
That's right. It's becoming less and less like me, it seems. I don't honestly know.
During the show, the camera fixates on Lane's shadow before she fully steps into frame. This is not typical cinematic language and suggests that the shadow identity or wired identity is overtaking her sense of self. Other students are equally shadow-like. People often face away from our view, normally facing technology as if this tech usurped their identity. Looking at the school kids, although school uniforms in Japan can be black, their uniforms are explicitly shadow-like. Lane's shadow reflects an oil spill-like puddle, appearing toxic, almost like a globe, as a symbol of toxic interconnectivity. Even in moments of intimacy, such as kissing while watching TV, we still cannot see their faces. It feels close, but it's never truly close. Lane is aesthetically very strange. The show was drawn by someone who studied Japanese art and is distinctly Japanese in tone. There's a lot of space between each beat of dialogue and story. There's a bunch of English text here, and Lane, and it's always circling around each other. It's hard to read to an average English speaker, let alone to a Japanese person. The show opens with a theme song that, unlike most anime at the time, it is entirely in English. Konaka has remarked on this. There is no alternative theme for Japanese viewers. This is not unheard of. There are, of course, exceptions. Very notable exceptions. I'm not denying that, but it's about a larger pattern here. The show opens with the line, "You don't seem to understand." I don't think that's incidental. English alongside Japanese is not unusual, and that's not the argument here. What is unusual is the extent.
You know this will be on the test.
A few English phrases, oh yeah, sure, totally. But Lane presents large swaths of English expository text. Very few television shows, if at all, has dumped exposition in text, let alone in a different language like this. For Lane, it feels like a deliberate strategy to create a foreignness in Lane's world. The flavor text was said by Konaka to emulate Jean-Luc Godard. Godard used advertising sensibilities in his films to criticize the dehumanization of capitalism. Signs and slogans often overwhelm his subjects. Lane does something kind of similar, echoing the appearance of web pages and magazines at the time. The title Serial Experiments Lain is presented entirely in English, with nothing beneath it. And this appears to be true across most localizations. The phrase itself is English wordplay, as Serial Experiment sounds like Surreal Experience. The title also parodies the X-Files logo, an American television show that was popular in Japan but still foreign. Most notably, the protagonist is named Lane, beginning with an L. The L is not native to Japanese phonetics, so if you were to read it in katakana, it would read with an R sound, like rain. In early drafts of the game, the character changes from Rayon, a real Japanese name, to Lane, suggesting that as she became more immersed in technology, she became more westernized and more alien. Lane also sounds like the English word alien. At one point, her name was even considered to be spelled with an E instead of an A. Aryan is how alien is pronounced in Japanese, yet the creators deliberately chose L. Even the phrase, "let's all love Lane," sounds foreign and cultic to the Japanese ear. Hideo Kojima does something similar in Metal Gear Solid 2 with the Patriots, codenamed the Lale Lule Lo, a phrase that is gibberish in Japanese but functions thematically as it's an organization that's secret that manipulates information.
じゃあ、はじめまして。私、アリスっていうの。思いっきりの名前でしょ？恥ずかしいんだけどね。
Risu sometimes adopts the name Alice in her text messages. but at the end sticks with the name Arisu. In the English dub, Alice sticks with Alice throughout the whole series, so this signifier of identity does not show up to Western audiences. Chiaki J. Konaka has explained that he adopted the middle initial J while making films as a child, taking on a westernized name similar to Charles M. Schulz, the creator of Peanuts. Serial Experiments Lain, the video game, marks the first time Konaka officially uses the middle initial J in his professional filmography. Prior to this, his name was written in kanji with no middle initial. It is highly unusual for a Japanese person to have a middle name, and Konaka has admitted that he does not actually have one. Chiaki J. Konaka's DJ stage name is DJ Wasa JJ Chikada. Wasa means made in Japan, and Chikada means cicada. As for names and identity being replaced by Western technology, Yoshitoshi Abe's name is most likely a reference to the defunct computer company B Inc. The B logo appears on the To Be Continued at the end of each episode.
Guest today is Dr. R.D. Lang, and Ronnie Lang, I'm not going to start by sticking a label on you because I have a feeling you're too complicated.
A quack? Yeah, I would say quack. Yasuyuki Ueda has said it is not the anti-psychiatrist R.D. Lang that gave Lane her name, although R.D. Lang is mentioned in the video game. He is also referenced in flavor text in the show. The text double mind, double bind is a reference to R.D. Lang. A double bind is when a person receives two or more contradictory messages and has to sort out what is true by negating the other. R.D. Lang said this leads to schizophrenia. He believed that schizophrenia is a social condition rather than one inherited genetically. This has no basis in actual psychology. In Lane's case, her double bind is two competing identities, one westernized and one not, which creates a metaphorical dissociative disorder. I don't know if Konaka or Ueda believe this is how the human brain works, but it works as a metaphor. We'll talk more about R.D. Lang when it comes to the video game, when we talk about that. In everyday Japanese life, kanji and hiragana are used most often, while foreign words are rendered in katakana. Online spaces and advertising geared towards Latin characters because the internet favors them. Lane's transformation into something foreign is also reflected in the show's production material. Different versions of her identity are written in kanji, katakana, and English. The kanji version represents her traditional shy and naive self, a child archetype. When translated from kanji, her name in this form sounds like rayon, which means the sparkle of jewels. The katakana Lane pronounced in Japanese phonetics is rain. It has no meaning in Japanese, though it does sound like the English word rain, a common motif in the video game. You tend to stay inside during rainy days, and rainy days match Lane's depression. This katakana personality represents her wired self. This is a westernized self. Katakana is a script associated with imports and foreignness, used to translate English phrases into Japanese phrases. This version adopts technology which is foreign to traditional Japanese cultural identity, but she is not separate from Lane. Psychologist Carl Jung calls this a persona. It's kind of a mask. Persona Lane is more confident and rebellious. She speaks in slang like a delinquent. We see this version after she goes to Shibuya 109, wearing new clothes, then exiting a McDonald's stand-in. Both are Western signifiers, one of Western fashion and the other of fast food. She wears makeup, which was still relatively new for preteens at the time. Lane is around 13 or 14 here. The version of Lane written entirely in English or Latin lettering in the production notes functions as a foil. The version comes from the Knights of Eastern Calculus worship the false reality of the Wired and seeks to bring about global singularity without borders. We discussed borders earlier, such as Mika and the Genkin, and the insides and outsides of her house. A common shot is the closing and opening of doors to signal a lack of connection. Lane is a shut-in with no friends. The Knights are the opposite, wanting to eliminate boundaries entirely. Both are shown as harmful. Members of the Knights and Japanese society itself are becoming less polite in their speech and outward behavior. Is this a part of the values lost after World War II that Yasuyuki Ueda was talking about? I imagine a conservative might think that.
How about a date? What do you say? What, is it that time of the month or something?
Hey, you ever hear of delicacy?
Just kidding. Oh, Lane, that's terrible.
I can't believe you just said that.
In episode 8, Katakana Lane fights English Lane. Katakana Lane is unable to do anything and feels English Lane's body heat. Kanji Lane watches as a shadow and terror. This Kanji Lane, once the dominant lane, becomes a shadow of her former self. It seems the English shadow self becomes Lane's actual self. Prior to this, Kanji Lane always has this other self following her as her shadow, which edges more and more into who she is. A shadow self is a big stumbling block here, as this feels very much like a reference to psychologist Carl Jung's shadow self. But in interviews with Chiaki J. Konaka, he says it's not so much about psychology, but more like religious systems. Spoiler for later on in this essay, but Lane is not in like a computer or anything. She's in a religious system. All this is just esoteric religion. Chiaki J. Konaka has made references to religions such as Theosophy, which has different layers to oneself. One is called the Kama layer, a desire-driven, lower spiritually intelligent aspect of Lane's self. Kama is the part of a person made of desire and emotion, the stuff that drives wanting and attachment, which fits as to what we're talking about when we're talking about like consumerist zombies and outward people. We will talk about Theosophy way later on. What Carl Jung calls the shadow self is different, but kinda close. Our shadow self is all the stuff that we repress about ourselves. Often what we repress is stuff we desire. The shadow is what the ego pushes away, or does not want to see in itself. These are denied or repressed traits. Either way, this is the subconscious negative self. Whether it's some sort of new age thing or from a Jung psychology, I couldn't tell you. It's very popular among the new age to use Carl Jung, as Carl Jung was deeply fascinated with religion. The Wired itself is signified by shadows and is a realm suited for those parts of ourselves that we reject and hate.
You acting like the part of me that I hate.
But we can repress many things about ourselves that are actually positive. This is one of the things that people really get confused about Carl Jung. The shadow has aspects that we dislike that we should actually integrate to become more whole. English Lane's impulsive on desire. She spies on her schoolgirl crush, while Kanji Lane is too inward, so much so that she's a shut-in. Shadow Lane is outward to the point that her rumors spreading hurts Arisu. However, Lane's shadow is also cunning and outgoing, and seemingly happy. Kanji Lane does not smile. The English Lane, well, she smiles, for better or for worse. Lane has a hard time showing these outward aspects of herself. The Knights of Eastern Calculus believe data should be shared completely without borders. English Lane, once part of the whole of Kanji Lane, shares the data of Arisu's private fantasies to the globe. Something inward is now outward. Kanji Lane wipes everyone's memory of this, with the exception of Arisu, who still retains the memory. But in the process of this mass forgetting of the initial trauma, this allows English Lane to somehow usurp Kanji Lane's position. People forget Kanji for English. Lane rewriting memory becomes a metaphor for forgetting cultural identity. Masumi Airi even instructs Lane in the same way, saying that one should just replace unhappy feelings with happy feelings.
To block the unpleasant ones, and then select only the happy, pleasant ones. It's really that simple.
It's really that simple. This is a major part of the manga, but we have all the pieces already. It can be applied to Japanese identity and technology. It's important to remember where you came from, remember your history in case you repeat it, and remember things that hurt. But what it seems Serial Experiments Lain is saying is that Japan is forgetting who they are and blindly adopting technology.
You know, maybe you should forget about it, Alice, and just not take it so seriously.
people forget the past constantly in Lain.
What's that? Lane, did somebody send you a love letter?
What?
And not just when Lain resets the world. When Juri receives an email from a dead girl, she cries uncontrollably, only to forget about it in the next episode.
Are you still getting email?
Email?
You know, from Chisa.
The same happens with the club incident, and the image of Lain in the sky is never mentioned again. The world moves too fast for the next generation because of this alienating technology. When surrounded by simulation, reality becomes secondary. Trauma does not register when space and time are distorted by the immediate nowness of the screen. This is one of the reasons why Lain resonates so well today. The past becomes a dream or something only seen on television. This is because, again, Lain is interested in the preservation of culture and the past. These are not necessarily conservative messages, but they do come from a conservative place, and that is worth examining. One could make the argument that, and I guess I will, that the work of Chiaki J. Konaka suggests that Westernization causes a lack of grounding, which leads to a disconnected family structure and environment, and weakened religious institutions. I don't think it's incorrect at all to say that Westernization, and therefore this hyper-capitalism that is brought forth to Japan, did not bring about alienation. That's 100% true. But Chiaki J. Konaka's work does not offer any real solutions outside of spiritual ones, because it kind of comes from a conservative place, and that's really important to explore. So before we carry on, I guess I have to give you a content warning out of nowhere. This next section has a lot of misogyny. Here's a timestamp if you just, want to avoid that. Chiaki J. Konaka's work is not just one thing when it comes to the fear of modernization. Westernization is sometimes there, often subtle, and at other times aggressively literal. For example, Evil Dead Trap 2 is a horror movie where a series of murders happens during the construction of a shopping mall. A woman who reports on these murders becomes sexually aroused by a corpse she sees. The reporter also does drugs, which is heavily stigmatized in Japanese culture, and Konaka underlines the excess with the party eating sweets, perhaps a reference to Tachima Mori. That by itself is a good old-fashioned criticism of modernity, but then she has sex with a married man while eating a cheeseburger. A symbol of Westernization. As an American myself, I think this scene is hilarious, and I wish I could show it to you, but it has nudity. But Evil Dead Trap 2 is also weird in all the wrong ways. Konaka has a problem with women. Women are framed as sexually liberated and morally wrong for their liberation. There are ghosts that represent the spirits of aborted children. A woman is haunted by her abortion. This isn't dialogue, I'm not interpreting this. She has to go to a shaman to get things worked out. These scenes are cross-cut with statues of Ganesh, a Hindu deity associated with children. These shopping mall killings are supernatural serial killings in which a woman haunted by this ghost becomes hypersexual and severs the of her victims when she kills them. And this is all done beneath the neon glow of modernity. I can't prove this, but I am willing to bet that the lead was chosen to be an overweight woman to criticize Americanization. Maybe they just like the actress. I like the actress, by the way. She is the highlight of a pretty miserable film. It does not totally lean into it. We do not see her scarf down like food. It could be totally incidental, but she does proudly wear American Army attire. Several times to myself, I've said that I should just 86 this segment, because it comes out of like nowhere, and just describing this movie is weird and like mean-spirited and hateful, and what it has to say is just moral rot. But I want to keep it in here because it really shows where Chiaki J. Konaka is coming from, socially and religiously. This abortion baby ghost that haunts her changes this girl from an inward person to a prowling, consumerized, I would say Americanized, serial killer. Evil Dead Trap 2 and Serial Experiments Lain surrounds a supernatural or kind of external threat from the backdrop of modernity that fundamentally changes who the protagonists are. Serial Experiments Lain also kind of has that same type of cultural conservatism, but it's not, mean. On the far other side of the spectrum, Door 3 is a film about the struggles of a young salarywoman who is forced to meet quotas and is encouraged to flirt with clients, while others even sleep with clients to achieve these goals. The women who work under this boss are zombified by a parasite he hosts. This immediately invites a feminist or Marxist reading because the patriarchal capitalist is literally a parasite. But Chiaki J. Konaka has openly advocated for laissez-faire, free-market, libertarian news sources, so your guess is as good as mine. I watched a bit of a show Konaka has advocated for. It's called The Corbett Report, not to be confused with The Colbert Report. The host apparently promotes 9/11 conspiracy theories and is into vaccine and climate change denial. It's like Diet InfoWars. He's worried about globalism. Sometimes he features new age stuff, and yeah, that totally checks out. Konaka wrote a storyline in which the Digimon, the Digimon, are attacked by cancel culture. I guess he's just that kind of dude. He had the cast of the show read it out at a fan event, for kids. Lain prescribes a middle way at the end of the story where technology or culture has not totally reverted, but has been minimized. The question is how Japan goes forward. Konaka's work is often at odds with the changing landscape of modern-day life, but he also seems to regard sitting still and being stuck in the past as just as destructive. Chiaki J. Konaka also wrote a TV movie based on the shadows over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. In Innsmouth, the residents have been cut off from the outside world for generations. There's a great fish drought, and they should move on to a place with greater resources. Similarly, the protagonist should get with this cute Americanized woman, but instead he chooses a traditional woman. It turns out to be the ghost of his mother. Womp womp. When the photographer is interrogated by the Innsmouth police after he reports his film stolen, he has no identity on him. The officer calls him no one. This brings to mind what Mika says when she is body snatched. Seeing her previous self wiped away is nothing at all.
It's nothing. It's nothing at all.
The photographer who captures still moments in time and due to guilt over not being there for his mother, who died, wipes his own memory away. Worse still, the fish people take him and the Americanized women where they are brainwashed into living in the past forever. Another project, Texhnolyze, similarly depicts a group of people stuck in the past. They're pale, almost ghost-like, while the main character, Aichisi, is dressed in black to match the darkness of the underground. Aichisi comes from the desolate wasteland beneath the upper class and says that at least the miserable people down there who modify their bodies to the point that they are more machine than man would rather reside in hell than be complacent in heaven.
You guys are the ones who are ghosts.
If sitting here day after day only reminiscing about the past can be called living, then I guess we are.
You want to die now?
Chiaki Konaka's work reimagines biblical archetypes and works like Armitage. In his hand, the third eye can become a cybernetic tumor, a laser sight, a bullet hole, or a drug injection site. This subverts the iconography as a way of saying what surrounds it is a perversion of what is correct and enlightened.
No matter where you are, everyone is always connected.
Serial Experiments Lain twists the Eastern belief of interconnectivity to be something cult-like. He regularly depicts cults in his work. Ghosts often take the form of spiritual indiscretion. Sometimes they're kitsune playing tricks from Shinto, or ghosts angered by undharmatic things like drinking alcohol from Buddhism, or improper feng shui from Taoism, or the previous tenant removing idols. Lane's house is drawn at an unnatural angle. Lane's house doesn't have any idols, and the Navi is almost like a technologized Kamidana, which subverts proper Shinto worship. Both the TV show and the video game use symbols of connection, such as telephone wires, bridges, crosswalks in Shibuya. Bridges in particular are sacred pathways between the human world and the realm of the spirits. You may recognize that in Spirited Away, which is inspired by Shinto beliefs. When Lain crosses a footbridge, it can be seen as her stepping into another world. She loses her hat at that moment, suggesting that she also loses her mind as she moves beyond the plane of regular existence into a land beyond. Chiaki J. Konaka has said that the girl named Lain is not clear about her origins or the circumstances of her birth, but one thing was certain: she was a being who was not connected to anyone. It was only after she formed connections with people at the Irakara family home, at school, and through the Wired that she became the person known as Lain. Without contact with others, one cannot be called human.
Maybe when a girl like Lain goes to a club, her personality does a complete 180.
In both Taoism and Buddhism, though in different ways, existence is understood as interdependent. Nothing exists entirely on its own. A tree grows because of sunlight, rain, soil, and time. What we call a tree is a temporary name for an ongoing process. The same is true for a person. What we call a person is a temporary pattern made by causes and conditions. That's much more of a Buddhist way of talking about these things, though. Anyways, Buddhists and Taoists see nothing by itself. There is no tree by itself, no Lain by itself. By this logic, everything is connected. Lain is Lain, but Lain is only Lain as defined by her relationship to family, friends, her nation, and the world around her. The horror of Serial Experiments Lain comes from the severing of these flows. As Lain learns more about herself, she realizes that she is alien from everything else. She is independent, not interdependent.
A fake family and fake friends. Yes, it was all just a lie.
That's another way to interpret Lain's hat. Its suspension in mid-air defies natural balance. It exists independently, out of harmony with the rest of the world. Not with gravity or the wind or her head, it's independent. The bird's shadow covering half of Lain's face recalls the Taoist yin and yang symbol, as to signal a change in identity. It's a change in flow, a change in the causes and conditions of Lain. Hat Lain, hatless Lain. Buddhists and Taoists see things as shaped by causes and conditions. That identity arises from interactions. In a horror movie by Konaka, a girl cheats on two men, where she becomes two different people because of this. She breaks up with these two men after she does not like the two different people she becomes. But it's small changes, like a change of clothes, or she talks in a baby voice, or she engages in more risky behavior. Again, small things change.
There's nothing unusual about taking on a different personality in the Wire than the one you have in the real world. It's pretty much expected, but yours are like total opposites.
No way!
Serial Experiments Lain is much more amplified in how it deals with causes and conditions and emotion. Because the Wired is a whole metaphysical system where everyone occupies a cosmic body, a cosmic structure where emotion is heightened because of who you associate with. So Lain takes this to the next level, where her emotions change by the people she was exposed to, whether it be friends, Japanese westernization, the Knights, a alienating technology built from UFOs, or aliens themselves. All various causes and conditions. Konaka says the Wired sometimes it biases and distorts the real world with people's malice, unintentional attacks, and the amplification of negative emotions, but that too is undeniably communication.
People only have substance within the memories of other people, and that's why there were all kinds of me's. There weren't a lot of me's per se. I was just inside all sorts of people, that's all.
Since we change moment to moment, those seeing us moment to moment have a limited understanding of the scope of a very complicated flow that is a person. From this perspective, person is shaped by their genetics, the culture they are brought up in, the language that they speak, the memories they have, their social interactions, their biology, the history they are born into, and the lottery that is life. The adoption of Westernization is important from the perspective of a Buddhist or a Taoist view of the self, because what one is a byproduct of their own environment, one's causes and conditions. Ueda explains, you see, Lain was something that was born out of the Wired. The Wired itself bore forth Lain.
Since the moment of the Wired's creation, you have always been here.
The dialogue with these Nesons state that Lain has existed in the Wired forever. So technically, Lain isn't independent truly. She comes from someplace. She's just independent of the known world, and she has no connections.
Good morning, Lain!
Hurry it up, will you?
Serial Experiments Lain draws from the aesthetics of Sumie painting, which reflects both Taoist and Buddhist sensibilities and its belief in interconnectivity. In Sumie, ink and empty space work together to create a relationship. What looks like blank space is an active part of the composition. The white space around this fish defines its relationship to the world. It represents its interdependence. The same thing goes for Lain in dialogue.
I don't get it.
Oh, you're alone. I thought somebody was in here.
A lot of people make fun of this, but this is actually intentional. Lain is utilizing the Japanese concept of ma. What ma is a gap that gives shape to everything else around it through pause. According to Chiaki J. Konaka, traditional anime scripts are usually 16 to 17 pages long, while Lain scripts are closer to 13 to 15 pages. There's a lot of breathing room in Lain. The trees and wildlife in these paintings have been exchanged for a dense web of power lines. The red blotched shadows resemble car lights, suggesting cities or modernity, which is juxtaposed with the aesthetics of traditional Japanese values. The game the kids play in Lain is called Phantoma, which sounds like the ghost of Ma. In some of the flavor texts, we even see the phrase cover Ma, as if this space of calm has been overlaid. We hear the covering of Ma and the omnipresent drones of power lines. One episode even parodies Sumie imagery, rendering it on a computer screen. Sumie is an art form that values stillness, yet the image moves around and is interrupted by newscasts.
It is quite possible that it may arrive tomorrow, right now, or perhaps yesterday.
My favorite example of this interconnectivity theme in Lain is the second episode. We see a conversation between a couple of girls, two sets of parties. Their dialogue is interspersed with whip pans. It's a technique not often used in conversation scenes. I've never seen it before, and it seems to symbolize dissonance between the two parties. It's Arisu who helps the shy Lain cross this dissonance. Many religious traditions are interested in balance. Lain's cord-like hair lops on one side of her head, so her appearance is out of balance. Navi, the computer that Lain has, is a joke name. Navigate implies direction, while naive implies a lack of awareness. Its logo recalls a all-seeing eye, the way the men in black spy on Lain, or the way Shadow Lain spies on Arisu. But the eye also echoes religious imagery surrounding interconnectivity. There is a famous metaphor in the Hindu Bhagavad Gita about a drop of water returning to the ocean where the individual becomes one with everything. Its logo also contains an omega sign, which Pioneer, the electronics company that published Lain, features in its own logo. So I guess that's a form of self-criticism or an Easter egg. Now, Chiaki J. Konaka says, at the beginning of Lain, the Wired is clearly modeled after the afterlife. This is why I chose a horror-like hook. As the story progresses, however, an entirely different phase begins to emerge. The Wired is represented by shadow, fog, and mist. The use of fog is common in ghost stories. Thrown to Blood comes to mind, which is, Japanese Macbeth, What Lain is essentially a ghost story. Lain has hallucinations which show smoke coming from her hands as if they are industrial chimney pipes. The visual was most likely inspired by the legend of Hell House. Chiaki J. Konaka has cited this film as one of his favorites. Hands are normally symbols of connection because you hold people's hands. Lain has none, and therefore they emit ghost-like signatures. Angel's Egg is a similar spiritual work that came prior to Lain. It was said to be an inspiration. It utilizes excessive amounts of space or pause or ma between moment-to-moment story beats, just like Lain. It shares a similar protagonist who is alien in nature, angelic in nature, and has this goddamn strand of hair dangling about. A similar character acts as a foil, attempting to trick her. Angel's Egg uses stark blacks, Lain uses violent whites. It's an inverse aesthetic. While we're on the subject of aesthetics, I mean, we're not going to talk about the game, but the Lain game mucks up its imagery with blacks and high contrast because it's a narrative about subjectivity, and you just can't make out anything in these photos. Upon meeting Tachibana's agents for the first time, they ask Lain about her origins.
Do you know if your parents are truly your real parents?
Huh?
Is your sister your real sister?
What are you asking me?
Yeah, this is very similar to David Cronenberg's Scanners.
Who's your mother? I don't know. Who's your father? I don't know. What was your first childhood memory? I don't have any. You were kept on ice.
Lain is a criticism of the modern Japanese family. Lain's parents are not her real parents, per se. She was created from the Wired like a fallen angel, copied and pasted from up above. Japan, work dominates everyone's lives, and men rarely see their families. Lain does not see or know her father. Her father works for Tachibana Labs, which is headed perhaps by a cult? There's some nuance to that, but if this is the case, it's a perfect metaphor for this work/life balance, as the father has more allegiance to his work than his family. The father in Masamiya Airi may have been part of Tachibana. This is evident from this photo in the documentary episode. Prior to his death, Masamiya Airi places his memories into the Wired and gains a following once he re-emerges from the dead. This online following might have included Lain's father and his wife.
It's almost over. It is, isn't it?
In Lain's parents' room, we see a castle painting, perhaps suggesting their allegiance to the Knights. They also have a painting of a fern right next to an actual fern, which says something about something. Lain's family seems to echo the Order of the Solar Temple. Many of the cult members there were upper to middle class people looking for alternative religious views. Lain's family does not give her the time of day on anything. At dinner, when Lain mentions receiving an email from a dead girl, her mother does not react. She also does not react to the news that Lain witnessed the shooting. Her father is absent from the table and does not greet her when he gets home. Lain also does not really have a relationship with her sister. There's a sense that Lain wants to be held, and that's why she dresses up as a teddy bear. Production notes also describe the bear as a security blanket. Bears appear throughout Chiaki J. Konaka's work, often representing family. Kuma-chan is a 1992 feature film about a bear that crash lands in a man's apartment. The bear is an alien, yet it behaves like a parentless child, something that a couple can care for. Lain takes on a similar role in the show. Food is an important background detail.
Say we get the whole thing set up for you right after dinner, okay?
Maybe set it up for me right now?
There is this scene where Mika, instead of drinking something healthy, drinks orange soda out of what looks to be a Coke bottle. As the series goes on, there is less and less food in the fridge. Most of the food that the family eats doesn't look very nourishing, and Lain only spins her soup around, never eating it.
I'm finished.
Hold on there. You didn't clean your plate.
She says she's on a diet.
Tell the whole world, why don't you?
At the end of the show, the food on the table is much more bountiful. In his commentary on Lain, Chiaki J. Konaka notes that Mika eats only westernized food. So, again, food is a signifier of westernization. Shinto places value on nature, and Lain presents the opposite environment. Serial Experiments Lain is fixated on electrical wiring. The wiring was built above ground due to the quick and cheap rebuilding effort after and from World War II. It's a weird-looking Japan. There's no forests, there's no paths, there's no spaces for the kami, which are spirits, only telephone poles and wires. Lane's world is very maximalist, with its cords wrapping every which way. It feels very Eraserhead. Ueda, in a recent online fan meetup, said no one hates David Lynch. In Japan, crows are seen as a nuisance because they tear open garbage bags and steal wire coat hangers. This might be why crows appear here. These crows can seem especially ominous since they sometimes attack people without reason. While there are sacred divine crows in Japanese folklore, especially three-legged ones, these are just ordinary ones. Like in Western culture, they symbolize death, and here they hang on wires symbolizing the death that comes from the wired. The director of Lain, Ryotaro Nakamura, paid homage to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds in Armitage 3. Maybe he's homaging the birds here too. But as a metaphor, the birds hang on wires while Lain hangs in the wired. The birds are socially withdrawn and build their nests from metal, living in technological isolation similar to Lain, similar to the Hikikomori. Taro Tokyo Demon War is one of Chiaki J. Konaka's earlier films, which has a westernized cult that grew in popularity in America, but its leader came from South Korea. It's a retelling of a Shinto myth called Mama Taro. It surrounds the slaying of a demon. The story was popular in Japanese propaganda, especially during World War II. In many retellings, the demon is foreign and often used as a stand-in for America. Konaka's version is different. It is not told from the perspective of a foreign demon that must be slain, but rather the demon is created by Japanese technology that was reappropriated from America. Japan and Americans are buddies and fight for Japan against supernatural technology. This technology surpasses the atomic bomb in strength and will allow the bad guys to bring about a one-world government through technocratic globalization. So it's not just me saying this out of nowhere, it's a theme running throughout decades of work. The story centers on Tachibana Labs. Yes, the same Tachibana, which Frankenstein's a demon. The front group behind Tachibana Labs uses rock and roll music to indoctrinate youth through subliminal messaging, leading young people to join a cult. It's not just for kids, it's for salarymen as well, who follow this new religion. They are reduced to mumbling zombies. Here, again, language is involved, so it seems symbolic of westernization in Japan. Technology as a form of possession is a recurring trope in Chiaki J. Konaka's work. He often frames cultural anxieties in pretty conservative ways, focusing on rock music, pop idol culture, and in Lain video game violence. Technology and westernization are frequently linked with cults in his stories, since cults represent the loss of individual identity to the collective. Characters mindlessly adopt the cult's doctrine. A group of young girls discuss the cult in a McDonald's stand-in, which is similar to that one seen in Lain, which shows commodity culture alongside cult-like culture. One of the most telling symbols of westernization is that at the beginning of the story, Taro wears a Chief Wahoo hat. Oh god. Baseball is America's pastime and one of many cultural imports Japan has adopted. Chief Wahoo, even at the time, signified the cultural reappropriation of Native Americans, as far as I can see, maybe since the 1970s. A Japanese boy wearing a signifier of cultural appropriation shows that he is under the mind control, because it's on his head, of the cult's doctrine of westernization. He eventually loses the hat once he becomes aware of the part he plays in the Japanese Momotaro myth, which is a part of his heritage. Baseball comes into play once more when he initially attempts to slay the monster with a baseball bat, but it proves powerless. Only through the help of his friend, who fulfills the Momotaro narrative, structure, can transform the baseball bat into the legendary 7-branch sword. In doing so, he reclaims his heritage, defeats the demon, and restores balance. Taro seems to occupy kind of a middle position between American influence and Japanese cultural preservation, suggesting a negotiation rather than a total rejection of westernization. I don't know, I think this is kind of off topic, but, well, an Americanized South Korean cult leader is likely a reference to the Moonies, or the Unification Church, headed by Sun Myung Moon. They're not as large as they once were when Taro came out, but they're still around. You may know them for bringing rifles to church and for mass arranged marriages. Sun Myung Moon, who I guess wore a crown, taught that he and his wife were the true parents of humanity, chosen by God to complete the mission of Jesus Christ. The group originated in South Korea and became tied to anti-communist politics during the Cold War. The Moonies had close ties to the South Korean government and the Korean CIA. This was known since the early 1970s, and they later worked closely with the American government after buying influence and entering its sphere, including founding newspapers like the Washington Times to promote right-wing ideas. Ronald Reagan admitted to reading the Washington Times every single day. The Moonies have been accused of a wide range of abuses, including brainwashing, financial exploitation, watching over people. It's a highly controversial organization.
Sun Myung Moon's Japanese followers soon took to the streets, as political activities on behalf of conservative business interests became central to the unification movement.
I want to thank her late husband, Reverend Moon, for founding the Washington Times, an organization for which I have tremendous respect and admiration.
Much like parts of the American right wing, the Moonies had a major influence on Japanese right-wing politics and the main conservative party there. This continued until one of their followers shot the Prime Minister in 2022. The Prime Minister had ties to the Moonies, and the shooter alleged that the Moonies financially ruined his family. As of writing, they have been disbanded in Japan. What the Unification Church represents here is an extremist cult-like fanaticism aligned with American ideals interfering in Japanese culture and society. Something similar later appeared in Lain, although the cult there seems to surround UFOs and stuff like Heaven's Gate, Shirinko, and the Order of the Solar Temple. Korea and Japan have a complex relationship, and okay, that's a major understatement. I'm sorry I even wrote that. But the problem here is that the villain is not an embodiment of South Korea itself. The Moonies are simply a very bad group and deserve to be criticized, even if they have a history of not wanting to be. Taro wields the 7-branch sword, which is a symbol of cultural heritage as well as a symbol of peace, originally a peace offering from Japan to Korea. So we talked about Lane's shadow on her Siberia excursion, and Mika's side gig selling drugs and selling who knows what. Well, that sets us up perfectly for Chisa and her persona. When Chisa dies, it's insinuated that her death is linked to a schoolgirl rumor, but there is some subtext which offers more clues about what that rumor might have been. We first see Chisa in an alley where a group of girls mock her for no apparent reason. Before Chisa's death, we glimpse at blood splatters marking the spot where she will eventually die, suggesting that we aren't operating within traditional narrative logic. The Wired can extend beyond linear time. I'll bring up this stuff when we talk about memory. That's really important here. Trust me, I'll get back to it. Later, or perhaps earlier, a young Gairu woman appears in the same alley, fending off an older man's advances. The scene mirrors Chisa's earlier experience in that same space. Gairu are a subculture known for heavy makeup and Western-inspired fashion. Here, we see a recurring motif of dressing up, performing a certain Western identity in relation to Westernization. Gairu girl could symbolically stand in for Chisa and what she was caught up in prior to her death. The fact that both events occur in this exact same spot draws a connection between them. This Gairu could embody Chisa's self during those outings. That's my takeaway, that is Chisa, and that's Chisa. One interpretation is that Chisa may have been groomed by an older man and was exposed and got bullied. This foreshadows Arisu's storyline later, as she is being groomed by her teachers. The game actually has a similar scene. Lain looks at a younger girl in an alley kissing an older man. Judging by how Chisa and the Gairu interact in this alley, we have to ask, is Lain looking at herself? We'll get to that in the next video. In the original script, Chisa sees the Gairu girl from on top of the skyscraper, and this leads Chisa to do what she did. In the aired version, the Gairu appears more like a non sequitur, but her presence still carries symbolic weight. Like look at how she's being pushed here by the older man, as if Chisa is symbolically being pushed off a building. Two small telling symbols here. When Chisa is about to jump, she reaches for the heavens, removing her glasses. We cut to a symbol of childhood innocence, a dangling toy hanging from a building like a noose. Lane's room is filled with similar cutesy childlike objects, and she dresses up as a bear, most likely wanting to be held by her father. After she falls, we see tiny pixelated red blood dripping down. The blood reminds me of the blotches reminiscent of the neon-scabbed wire. Even in death, Chisa somehow sends an email to her classmates. In my headcanon, the girls laughing earlier are the same ones crying later, merely performing different personas, and feeling bad about their bullying. Lain has no connections, she's depressed, she's isolated, and somewhat naive. This is perfect for cult recruitment. Lain throughout the show seems to keep Chisa's offer of heaven in mind, although it's not explicitly shown, most likely due to censorship. So these suicidal ideations are shown to us symbolically. So Lain watches people ascend a stairway to a white light, which is a stairway to heaven. There are major problems with interconnectivity with family and friends, but there are also major problems with adults and children. Children are constantly at odds with the adults around them. Lain gets her first computer from a young man, maybe in his early 20s, arriving at Lane's house to drop off a couple of boxes. It's a weird moment because she's a minor and he just waltzes into her house. Even if he's only placing a couple boxes inside, it's intrusive. However, it makes sense why Lain might be open to him from a psychological perspective. He resembles a younger version of her father and shares many of the same interests. When she tells him she has no interest in computers, it cements for me that her interest in computers stems from wanting to spend time with her father. As a side note, the Tachibana lab agent is around the same age as her father, and Lain is willing to help him with computers. As Lain grows up without any real guidance from her parents, with no one to ground her, she becomes more and more vulnerable, and eventually she starts looking for comfort and meaning in the Wired. The act of donning the bear costume, looking for love, becomes kind of a rehearsal for tumbling down the rabbit hole when she doesn't get the love she deserves. The unusually large window in her room resembles a monitor, serving as a metaphor for the Wired, as a view from the outside world. The stuffed animals that sit on her window appear as if they belong inside a computer monitor, resembling the shadowy netizens of the Wired. One stuffed animal is a rabbit. This shot of a fan stand reminds me of a computer stand, making Lain seem like she is engulfed into a monitor. When Lain comes downstairs, we see her mother and father kissing for an unusually long period of time. Freud and Jung both saw how the child internalizes early affection from a parental figure and later seeks to replicate it. Upon seeing her parents kiss, Lain immediately wants to set up her computer, even though she didn't care about it earlier that day. And in the next scene, Lain is going to Siberia to connect with others deep into the city, which indicates to me that Siberia is just a program inside the Wired that she accesses through the Navi. There is a clear puberty subtext, much like many Alice in Wonderland type stories. Her body is changing along with her computer changing.
Why are you dressed like that?
It's for static electricity. They say the only way to really prevent it is to take your clothes off.
Lane begins to take on more adult roles and adult clothes, and she talks more like an adult. She doesn't have parents to really help her through this kind of crisis. Chisa and Arisu feel like girls going through similar problems as Lane, with perhaps similar absent fathers. Once her father figure disappears from her life, this leaves Lane to be groomed by Irie. Masumi Irie steps in as a new abusive partner and a surrogate father figure. Freud and Jung both saw how people saw father figures to be stand-ins for God, which fits perfectly with the power he claims over her, and which makes her very susceptible to his influence. The Wired starts to encroach on people's daily lives, but they cannot fully immerse themselves without a device called a Pushuke chip and other specialized equipment. Psyche, it's a Psyche chip. Most people lack these tools or the skill to operate this equipment, and without them they cannot project their entire bodies into the network. But everyone is being affected by the Wire, from this breaking of reality, as well as being pushed further into it by the religion of the Knights. Lane mysteriously gets this stuff, this Psyche chip and this specialized equipment, most likely by those who want to observe her, that being Tachibana.
Something interesting is about to unfold. We should just watch from the sidelines.
The same kissing that leads Lane to want to build her computer motivates her to enter the doors to Siberia and learn about how to use this Pushuke chip. She sees the kissing couple, which is what she wants.
Come on. Why not? Why not?
I can't.
The growth of her computer parallels a subversion of puberty, the growth of a new body. She desires to divorce herself from her body, which disallows any real intimacy and any real connection in favor for a simulated one. We see this connection to the Wired world as synonymous with sexuality in the opening. She is seen in ecstasy. Near the end of the show, she calls sex connecting.
Connecting? I don't understand you.
You really love her like you say. Then, Lane, why don't you try connecting with her?
And that love is equal to connecting. And Lane mistakes Arisu's platonic love for an invitation to sex. When Lane falls deeper down the rabbit hole, we see a lot of imagery of downward spirals. Some she scribbled herself. She learns how to build a computer from a book called Hacker's Heaven. Hacker's Heaven is kind of a joke name. It's exactly what Chisa promised. When Lane tumbles down the Wired, she can hear people as if she's listening to chatter on internet forums. A girl accounts a hallucination about a small man standing in her doorway wearing a red and green striped shirt.
See? There's a little person like a kid there, wearing red and green striped clothes. I can't move in my bed. It's standing by my door. I can feel it watching me.
So maybe that's what the Wired is. It's a collective hallucination or a collective dream, considering the red and green striped shirt is a Nightmare on Elm Street reference. Freddy Krueger can enter your dreams.
They're shared in the collective unconscious.
In the 8th episode, we can see quite blatantly that the Wired is accessible via nightmares. Here we see Lane descending upon several layers of reality as Lane lies here still in kind of a sort of night terror, unable to move. This is a big hint towards the video game and manga. If we connect this to some esoteric religion, we can understand the metaphysics of what's going on here. But for now, let's take a breather from religion and just know that the Wired is connected to dreams. Lane looks past the wires, past the skyscrapers, into Siberia, past Shibuya. So Siberia and Shibuya, narratively speaking, they are layers of the Wired. The red and green striped Freddy shirt is a bit of a foreshadowing here, as eventually Lane dons the red and green striped shirt. This can mean that this sequence is a dream, since Arisu is on her bed having it. Shadow Lane similarly sits on the bed here and can spy on Arisu's private fantasies, not when she's just at her computer, so she may be spying on Arisu via a dream. Lane also sees an alien with a red and green striped shirt while she's on her bed, and not when she's at her computer. This dream thing isn't a small, little detail. It matters to the plot, because Lane communicates with Arisu in dreams later in the story as an alien-looking thing. This is because Lane thinks the Shadow Lane stole her material body, and so she must enter the Wired, which connects to dreams, to talk to Arisu and apologize. An episode prior, Lane is tricked.
You see, it just happens you're no longer needed in the real world.
In this scene, Arisu does not behave like herself, so this should signal to us that this is just a trick. By that logic, this scene with the shadow self emerging from Lane as she is being called by her friends is also a trick. Lane is confronted by the ghosts of former members urging her to discard her body.
There's nothing easy about dying. Never is.
But later on, Arisu reveals that the cult's teachings were false, that Lane was tricked.
It feels like your body's cold, but you're alive, Lane. Here, give me your hand.
A small but important shot here is that when Lane enters Arisu's fantasies to spy on Arisu masturbating, she enters via a window, very similar to Lane's window, as if she's entering her curtained monitor, which again, insides and outsides, which is important thematically. Lane metaphorically is a peeping Tom here. The use of windows here may explain why the men in black, Chisa and Irie, appear outside her house, as if they are to be seen from her window or inside her monitor.
I'll call the police.
But what could you possibly say to them when we're not even here?
The men in black operate within a layer of the Wired, which is why Lane can use psychic blasts to scare them away, or why her room can blow up and in the next episode it's all fine. The men in black trying to get into her home functions as a metaphor for hacking, an attempt to intrude into her house, using a logic similar to Shinto ghost stories. This inside and outside dynamic is common in Chiaki J. Konaka's Shinto ghost stories, so it makes sense here. There are small things from my notes that I want to talk about. The show uses iconography from Final Fantasy VII's packaging. There are some interesting design choices when Lane enters new areas. Lane's cyber worlds aren't anything fancy, they are symbolic and sparse. This one has a tree like spiderweb and is all foggy. The fishnet leggings are similar to the web-like design. When Lane is searching for clues, she's on a literal search bar, which is another neat idea. The game realm is in line with the second episode of Alice in Cyberland. A statue, depending upon how it's drawn, may represent the scientist from the kids episode or Lane's father with a mustache. I don't know, maybe he was younger. Which might explain how they obtained the children for the experiment and why Lane goes to that school. Once Lane becomes aware that she is being idolized by a cult, naturally, she wants to get to the bottom of it. But Lane's mystery is kind of complicated, which was the style of cyberpunk works at the time, normally taking their plots from Raymond Chandler's detective fiction, like The Long Goodbye or The Big Sleep. So here's the mystery. Masumi Irie heads the Knights. He uses children for his operation, most likely because of their psychic sensitivity. They recruit children through a video game called Phantoma. Tachibana Labs, which once employed Irie before he became a so-called god of the Wired, employs the men in black to spy on Lane. The Knights are a group of hackers. One member is a Slav, most likely inspired by Nedry from Jurassic Park. Another is a bored housewife with a child, and one appears to be a businessman with ties to high society and a Sharon Stone-style secretary, inspired by the film Basic Instinct. The secretary is a rare moment where the show adopts a voyeuristic gaze towards a woman. Her purpose seems to highlight the businessman's disinterest in intimacy. One shot frames his hand over her legs as he's typing, which makes it look like he's feeling up her computer legs. The Wired is more interesting to him. The same goes for this kid, who has this girl super interested in him, but he always has his wired blinders on. Bored housewife, tied to the Knights, receives bugged mail from a postal worker who delivered Lain her computer. This delivery guy is most likely an agent of Tachibana. The mom susses out that this is a harmful ploy by Tachibana Labs and destroys the bugged hardware by frying it in the sink. This guy from Tachibana and Masumi Airi have the same motives. They want to bring about a global technological singularity.
What are you planning to accomplish by connecting the wired to the real world without using any devices?
Something absolutely wonderful.
The MIB seem to want to keep the wired and the real world separate and assassinate the Knights for changing things around.
The wired can't ever be allowed to operate as a special world again. It can only be a field that functions as a subsystem to reinforce the workings of the real world.
This Tachibana agent double-crosses the MIB once he disposes of his enemies.
You've been using us all along, is that what it is?
Well, you can interpret it any way you like.
The guy from Tachibana aims to collapse the world into a single unity. To achieve this, Tachibana manipulates Lain in releasing her consciousness into a computer system, effectively turning her into a weapon. Similar to what happened to Mika, Lain, like many archetypical angels, can bring about the apocalypse.
Without getting too technical, I'm basically a program designed to destroy the barrier between the wired and the real world.
She then manifests as a mirror shard in people's eyes and forces them to be a part of a networked global singularity.
Our client was in contact with Masami Eri.
Whether this Tachibana Labs figure is a member of the Knights or is competing for power is just unclear, and the narrative leaves this totally unresolved. If Tachibana Labs and Masumi Airi are both allies, it may be the best way to understand Lain's parents. Lain's father works with Airi, who works at Tachibana. The father is a follower of Airi, meaning he is part of the Knights. The father may have allegiances to both, as Tachibana might have allegiances to Airi. This suggests that the entire grand conspiracy of Serial Experiments Lain is actually just a circle. The ultimate question might be why Tachibana would contract these men in black to kill members of the Knights. The answer may be that the MIB are paid to make sure that no anonymous member of the Knights can come along, put up a force field, or reset something to defy Masumi Airi. There's no indication that any of the Knights could do that, but that's my best guess. Ultimately, this doesn't matter, as Lain resets the world in the next episode. The question, of course, arises as to why. Why is it written like this? And the answer is that the narrative is confusing because it corresponds with the confusion of modern Japanese society. The plot itself reminds me of Lain's flavor text. It's nonsensical and ultimately doesn't matter. Lain's plot is more thematic than, plot-driven. It chooses to be confusing on purpose. It's confusing, and so is modernity. Honestly, I think Chiaki J. Konaka is a conspiracy wingnut, and this may be just how his mind works. Lain, as a protagonist, is more anti-hero than hero. She doesn't actually stop the club shooter. She seems to make him himself, similar to the David Cronenberg scanners.
Why are you making me do this? What right do you have?
And weren't you also in the club at the same time when those stupid things happened? So what are you planning to do now?
She tortures a kid and kills numerous people by doxing them. She causes this car crash.
Vega, take care of Julie.
Alice!
Arisu is actually the true protagonist here, and Arisu wins the day by crossing a boundary and connecting with Lain. That's all she really has to do. Arisu is Alice in the story, and Lain is the White Rabbit. And I guess the White Rabbit in Lain's story is actually her father. At the end of the series, Lain uploads her Navi into her brain through an emulator, gaining the ability to use it whenever and wherever she wants. This effectively grants her superpowers, and she doesn't have to use her Navi anymore. Chiaki J. Konaka's earlier work, Defender, also centers around the acquisition of technological superpowers, but its protagonist is not enlightened and eventually rejects them. Lain is naive and repeatedly makes mistakes. She has the power to influence world events by hacking into the Wired, but no reliable way of predicting the consequences. When she doxes the Knights, they are immediately killed by the MIB because they pose a threat to the Wired. Taoism is all about going with the flow. A whole Digimon episode is about that. I had to watch, like, a lot of Digimon just for research.
Humans can be so silly. Sometimes they're up and sometimes they're down. They gotta learn to go with the flow.
Lain is impulsive. She doesn't assess the situation. She fights it. It's better to push things to the right direction effortlessly than to change them rigidly, at least in the tradition of Wu Wei in Taoism. There's a lot of religious iconography in Digimon, which is crazy, but yeah, absolutely. For example, this is a yin-yang. This is the Shinto version of the yin-yang, which is the Cancer signifier in astrology, but this is also called a twofold tomo. Whoever did these creature designs was interested in taking different religious signifiers and applying them to their story. All these different signifiers convey balance. And hey, is that a Lain reference? I think so. With this new pseudo-enlightenment, she connects to an alien layer of reality and learns that she may be able to turn back time for good, rather than merely erase people's memories. So we're talking about turning back time rather than just erasing people's memories. I am so sorry this is so complicated.
I wanted you to know that I can undo some things that never should have happened.
She tells Arisu this, most likely in her dreams, appearing as an alien, because she is now grounded in the causes and conditions of the alien plane of existence that she just visited. This works as a metaphor, as she is respecting boundaries as much as she can, and at this point in the story, she is more distant from everyone, more alien from everyone than she has ever been, hence standing behind a closed door. Lain resets time, but has Arisu remember everything because she, again, is not wanting to intrude on Arisu's thoughts like her shadow does.
Why did you only leave my memories alone?
When Arisu visits Lain, she finds her wrapped up in cords like a fly trapped in a spider's web. She finds her in spiritual bondage to an invisible entity that Lain calls God. Masumi Airi is no such thing. Lain is native to the Wired and was displaced by Masumi Airi, who took her place. When he realizes that he is an acting god and that Lain is the actual god, he is enraged. Even though she isn't actually the actual god, she actually denies that in the next episode, but, you know, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Nevertheless, Masumi Airi is unable to act since he has no physical body and cannot construct one. This also aligns with the theme of causes and conditions.
They are not an end in themselves.
But wait a minute. Who gave you those rights? What you did was to remove all the peripheral devices that interact with the Wired. Phones, television, the network. But without those, you couldn't have accomplished anything.
Yes, Lain. Those are things which accompanied human evolution.
Once Lain realizes that his power can only exist through material systems, she understands that he is not transcendent at all. He's a byproduct of the material world, dependent on the same causes and conditions as everything else. In claiming godhood, Airi has only stepped into a position that already existed. He has replaced something. He hasn't surpassed anything. Airi attempts to disprove this by manifesting himself from the upper layer of the Wired into the lower layer, trying to demonstrate that he exists independently, but Lain realizes that he's no god, and his godhood arises from a network of causes and conditions. Now, Lain defeats Airi through interconnectivity and interdependence until he just kind of sort of exhausts himself. I guess he's just out of power.
You'll at least let me pick the curtains for the bedroom, right?
Yes, ma'am. Anything that makes you happy, it's fine with me.
The TV show ends with a 22-year-old Arisu in love with her 40-year-old teacher. The same teacher who was grooming her when she was in middle school.
Oh, that teacher. He sure is hot.
Yeah, but rumor has it that he's seeing an 8th grader. I still haven't figured out who it is, though.
There's all those rumors going around about you and that teacher. I think if you get a boyfriend, everyone will finally know that it's all just a pack of lies.
It's not a lie.
Lane plays a role as a guardian angel to Arisu. I assume Lane would not allow her best friend to be groomed by a teacher into adulthood, so Arisu, who is also a teacher here, may have met her former teacher as an adult. She can consent now. However, we as an audience know who he actually is. Just because the timeline changes doesn't mean that who he is changes. He still may be taking advantage of kids in this timeline. I imagine that since he's a teacher, he explicitly got a teaching job to become a predator.
It's fine with me.
Anything? That's my good student.
So in this timeline, he could still be grooming students just behind Arisu's back, so what the hell? So maybe she alters his free will or something. Can Lane change this man's free will? She does not seem to change anyone else's free will, only their environment. So maybe not? Is he or is he not a sex pest? And the show just kind of leaves you with that. I hope he's not. Either way, why did Arisu have to end up with this guy in the first place? Why not, like, literally anybody else? Well, thinking of it, like, in terms of themes, there might be a reason for that. Subtextually, Lane is crushing on Arisu, but that does not go anywhere. Lesbian shows such as Revolutionary Girl Utena aired on TV Tokyo in 1997, and Lane aired on TV Tokyo in 1998. They occupied similar late-night slots, so it's not a matter of censorship. One reason Lane and Arisu do not end up together may be that the creators wanted a more religious conclusion. So Lane divorces herself from romantic relationships to be one with everything, like a celibate. However, there is also a broader conservative message here. Schoolgirl lesbian Yuri romance is often framed as kind of a non-threatening thing to the status quo. Gay boys are considered more threatening. Lesbianism is tolerated so long as it does not replace heterosexual adulthood. There is a belief that girls can go through a phase and have to grow out of their gayness. So Lane drops any lesbian subtext in favor of a return to a perceived normalcy. But this perceived normalcy is just weird. What I think they were trying to go for was that Arisu grows up and falls in love with a figure representing institutional, patriarchal authority. And since she is a teacher, she is a symbol of maternal care. They are all grounded in a sort of idealized conservative relationship. But this, holy shit. Yasuyuki Ueda has said when it came to religion, he used whatever works while writing the Lane video game. Ueda said in a fan meetup that he is drawn to New Age books from the West. Yoshitashi Abe provided the art for Serial Experiments Lain. He later wrote Haibane Renmei, which is worth your time. The show uses the aesthetics of multiple religious traditions. It's a story that explores the pursuit of salvation without committing to a single unified framework. This blending of religious ideas was common in anime and video games at the time, as we discussed. But for instance, Neon Genesis Evangelion borrows from many religious traditions. The end of Evangelion during the third impact draws from Prologue, the concept of a grand reset at the beginning, and then the end of theosophical and Hindu cosmology. Lane does this as well, but subverts this idea of togetherness into a painful technological unity. The Schumann resonance is used as a metaphor for technological adoption, but there was also a real New Age interest in it. Some New Age thinkers believed it would bring about a grand unity resembling kind of a technological prolaya.
People's memories aren't just personal or one part or unrelated fragment of the history of humanity, but they're shared in the collective unconscious. Do you think that humans could create something that could store memory that's that vast?
Parsing out truth in Lane is difficult because almost everyone is an unreliable narrator, since most are cult members who misunderstand reality, and everyone uses language in ways that conflate esoteric religion with computer terminology. The Wired is a mystical system. but these concepts are often described in computer terms, which makes everything really confusing. I guess we have to ask, what is a protocol in computer terms? Well, it's how a computer network operates. There is a computer machine itself, then above that there's operating systems, and then there's applications. People make computer systems, though. A person did not make the collective unconsciousness. Lain is using computer terminology to describe esoteric religion. This is all just religion. An interviewer once asked, "Have you always been interested in Jungian philosophy?" Chiaki J. Konaka responded, "We use the phrase collective unconsciousness in Lain, but we could have easily substituted Kabbalah or Akashic record. So this work is not particularly based on Jungian philosophy." This Akashic record idea comes from Theosophy. In Theosophy, psychics and mediums can access the Akashic record through meditation. The Akashic record is a cosmic archive containing every thought, event, experience, past, present, and future. So this vast collective consciousness thing that Chiaki J. Konaka is talking about is very similar structurally to Kabbalah or Theosophy. But Kabbalah does not have a record where all memory is stored, which is something Lain talks about. So Lain is based on or inspired by Theosophy. Konaka's other works sometimes mentions Theosophy's founders and seems to be inspired by Theosophy itself. Theosophy is a syncretic belief system that teaches that all major religions contain fragments of a single underlying wisdom, and that practice within any tradition can lead to spiritual growth and sometimes liberation from birth and death cycles. Religions are not seen as rivals. Theosophists kind of do their own thing. This is much more pointed in other projects by Chiaki J. Konaka. One is called Alice in Cyberland. Alice in Cyberland is a little-remembered OVA that centers on a group of cyber-anarchists wreaking havoc on Cyberland. Cyberland is essentially the internet. It connects to every computer, but when cyber-anarchists crash the system, the memory they disrupt is not just computer memory, but some people's real memory. Cyber-anarchists affect a collective record that shapes people's sense of self. Alice, a child dealing with the recent loss of her father, along with her friends, fight to protect this memory. They go to one of the deeper layers of Cyberland and slay a dragon, stopping the hacking. The cyber-anarchists also want to disconnect Japan from the globe. They're isolationists. Some of Chiaki J. Konaka's work is critical of westernization, but also critical of isolationism. I think that is worth mentioning. Alice in Cyberland explores themes common to much of Japanese children's television. The story is an allegory about balance and technology. Cyberland represents Japan's collective identity, and the anarchists symbolize a lawless force that threatens to detach Japan from its history and identity. This serves as a prototype for Lain, a digital cautionary tale about the ethical stewardship of technology, as well as memory, and therefore cultural preservation. A literal network of memory also appears in Serial Experiments Lain. In the documentary episode, we hear of Ted Nelson, a real person, the father of hypertext, who later proposed Project Xanadu, a utopian digital library meant to preserve and connect all human knowledge forever. In Lain lore, he built it, unlike, in real life. It is never elaborated how, but we can infer alien technology was involved because there was, an alien crash. And Xanadu, which is a computer system, better known as the Wired, allowed access to the record by accessing this alien plane of reality that Lain sees. This is what the Navi connects to in Serial Experiments Lain, the TV show.
Click, click, click. Memory check.
And this is most likely what we're playing with when we're connecting to these memory and diary nodes in the video game. It's all from the Akashic record. I'm not really spoiling anything here, but at the end of the game, we see the phrase, "What's your memory? What's your record?"
Also known as the Mongolian Utopia, where all written cultures would be forever preserved and live on for all eternity. This was Xanadu. And so it was the innovative concept called hypertext that would finally make it a reality.
Humans may have harnessed this invisible system, this collective consciousness, through Ted Nelson's hypertext, and the electromagnetic waves encircling the planet may have made this kind of communication system possible. As this Lain says, humans never created the collective unconsciousness. It solves a lot of questions as to why things are out of order, why memory is shifting. Lain learns that Tachibana Labs is punching a hole between the material world and the wired, most likely affecting the Akashic record. This explains the blood splatters prior to Chisa's death, the club shooter seeing things in fast motion after taking a drug, and Mika being at her house and in Shibuya at the same time. It's all a matter of memory. This Akashic record also explains some other oblique lines, such as,
well, it's simply that what isn't remembered never happened.
Not remembered?
That's right. If you aren't remembered, then you never actually existed.
On its own, that doesn't make any sense. But if there is a supernatural memory archive, then I guess it would. Irie says that he put his memories as code, but what the Wired is not really code nor a protocol. Again, it's a religious system. Irie's memories are all that's left of him, and I suppose the substance of his memories are in control of the Wired. Lain also has the ability to manipulate everyone's memories. But what is called the Wired is not just a system of memory, it's a whole system with different layers of existence, with a bunch of electromagnetic waves holding things together. Theosophists, who were spiritual thinkers, tried to explain how our bodies and minds functioned by proposing that invisible layers interconnect with material layers, acting as a kind of cosmic body that connects all beings together in an invisible interlocking system of waves.
The physical body exists on a less evolved plane only to verify one's existence in the universe.
Your emotions are in one plane of existence, your thoughts are in another, heaven is beyond that. The material plane is what you see in your day-to-day life, and in reality you are connected to everyone because of these planes. Normally, these layers are imperceptible, but Masumi Irie causes them to break down. In Lain, the realm of dreams are not only accessible with this newfangled technology, but are encroaching on our day-to-day lives. It's pseudoscience, but back in the 20th century, there was popular theosophical thinkers such as C.W. Ledbetter and Anna Besant who published works that reinterpreted the electromagnetic spectrum as a ladder of spiritual planes, where increasing frequency meant moving from physical reality to higher realms. In Theosophy, the reason we cannot perceive these multiple layers of reality clearly is due to Maya, a concept borrowed from Hinduism. However, sensitive individuals could see these things as if they were kind of radiation. This is something Lain can see in the video game. It's kind of purple to her. Different Lanes are brought about by different people. Lain's acquaintances with the Knights bring out different aspects of herself than Lain hanging out with her friends or hanging out with aliens, but these personalities are different layers of the same person. To take on a new personality is to be expected in the Wired, but Lain's emotions are the total opposite. In one of these layers of reality, we have desire-driven parts of ourselves, so this is where Lain's shadow self emerges. Calling Lain's shadow self a shadow self is probably incorrect. The correct term might be Kama in theosophical language. Your emotions, your desires, your dreams, your thoughts, your memories, there's churchyard ghosts, and ideas of heaven are all understood as higher layers of reality. In this framework, all things emanate or transfer from higher planes into the material plane, which is what is experienced in everyday life. Above this material realm is a second plane of existence that holds dreams and thoughts and desires, and etheric or alien dimensions in some radical interpretations of theosophy that came way later. Since Lain is able to access the Wired through nightmares, it can be interpreted as existing within the second layer of reality. In some UFO interpretations of theosophy, this same layer is also associated with alien intelligences. Above even this are further strata, including conceptions of heaven and other transcendent realms. Theosophists believe that since the world is interconnected through these planes, knowledge of this leads people to act with universal love because everyone occupies this same cosmic body. Failing to understand this keeps people focused on their own egos and distraction rather than on a larger universal whole.
Daddy, do you know what?
What?
Everyone. I feel like...
You love them?
The mom says that the material world is illusionary.
The wired might actually be thought of as a highly advanced upper layer of the real world. In other words, physical reality is nothing but an illusion, a hologram of the information that flows to us through the wired.
The Knights see the material world as a projection of a higher realm of information, which is how Theosophy sees things. Your thoughts, your desires, your dreams all come from a higher plane that emanates down. But, and this is a big but, this does not make the material world unreal. The perceivable world around us is real, but it is just a layer of a larger system. However, the Knights believe that the wired, the layer above ours, is the only true reality, equating it to heaven. They believe that anyone without body is a lesser evolved being. What the Knights do not know, and what Lain learns, is that above what is called the wired are higher spiritual levels that Theosophists would call heaven. The wired offers sex, drugs, and endless temptation, mind-dulling distraction, but not bliss. Bliss cannot be obtained by being trapped in desire. At Lane's lowest point, she appears to be in literal bondage, cords wrapping every which way, like spiritual bondage. Serial Experiments Lain is filled with moments where characters are lost in illusion, but one of the clearest is Lain looking off her school rooftop. It mirrors Chisa jumping off of her rooftop. Just like Chisa, who takes off her glasses, Lane's vision of reality is blurry. Arisu accuses Lain of losing touch with reality. The blocking really tells us everything we need to know. Lain is framed behind bars, only able to see through them. Arisu stands above the bars, looking over them. In the final shot of Serial Experiments Lain, Lain looks above the bars of a footbridge. Lain herself is a girl lost within an illusion, which Maya represents. Theosophical thought, being trapped in ignorance, prevents her from being liberated from cycles of reincarnation. The endless resetting of Lain's world after continuous mistakes could be a rebirth metaphor. By sacrificing herself, she lets go of her ego and reaches a form of enlightenment. So, the question kind of arises, what is Lain exactly? It's shown that the Shadow Lain is being worshipped, and people worship her like the 90s cult leader Sharinko was worshipped by his cult. So, people see her as God. Masumi Airi tells her that she is a homunculus of artificial ribosomes, hologrammed down from the wired, not born naturally into the world. Airi attempts to create his own body in the material world, but he is unable to do so. He does not have that power. Lain came from the wired, but how she came from the wired is unclear. But Project Kids is most likely the answer. Project Kids was about tapping into the collective unconsciousness and using the psychic sensitivity of children around this black box. Because the shape of the room looks kind of like a UFO, and the black box has markings similar to the UFO layer of the wired, I'm guessing that there is alien technology in this black box, probably from Roswell. And I'm guessing that Lain is somehow from the Roswell crash. This was the power that brought Lain from the collective unconsciousness into the real world, the power that Airi did not have. So alien technology functions as a metaphor for the atomic bomb and powerful technology and how it alienates people and all that good social commentary stuff, but literally there is an actual religious UFO cosmology here. Some Theosophists believe that one plane of reality is alien in nature, but this idea arose in later New Age circles. It's not originally part of Theosophy. There are no UFOs in original Theosophy. This originated like 100 years later from the cultist May Lain. Not L-A-I-N, but L-A-Y-N-E. In 1947, after the Roswell incident, Lain claimed that UFOs were etheric, and came from the etheric realm, meaning that they came from a place above our realm of existence, in the astral plane, where thoughts, dreams, and desires are. Ether is a thing from alchemy that doesn't exist in the material realm, so some guy in the 1940s thought that UFOs are hidden and fall from the skies. They must be made of ether and come from the etheric realm rather than a different planet. They are etheric and transport themselves into the material realm. Serial Experiments Lain mentions aliens by referencing John C. Lilly, who was a neuroscientist who did sensory deprivation experiments with LSD, and then pivoted to dolphin communication research. As you do, he was an interesting figure who believed dolphins spoke through ultrasonic signals and suggested that consciousness itself might connect through natural frequencies. So what you see in your brain is also a thing that exists outside your brain. He spent long periods in sensory isolation tanks. These tanks let someone experience a near complete sensory void, which the body then tries to compensate for by amplifying certain feelings and causing hallucinations. The US government now uses it for torture, but, he used it for fun. New Agers at the time thought that the body was tuning into hidden layers of consciousness, allowing the mind to access spiritual or higher dimensional truths. In Lane's sister show, Alice in Cyberland, it features the three girls who enter cyberspace through similar tanks. Lane's room is kind of similar. It has water there, she's hallucinating, and she's in total isolation. Lilly claimed to have contact with non-human intelligences, essentially aliens, called the Earth Coincidences Control Office, which he believed could shape events in his life through cosmic coincidences. They're essentially archetypical guardian angels. The archetype of an alien watching over us is found in a lot of New Age thought. Similarly, Theosophists believe in enlightened beings known as Masters of Wisdom or Mahatmas, who live in remote places like Tibet or the Himalayas. If you're a fan of Twin Peaks, you know co-writer Mark Frost. He said, just outwardly, that these strange creatures that guide the characters are Masters of Wisdom. In later New Age UFO circles, these beings were often reimagined as extraterrestrials. ECCO and Mahatmas both guide human evolution, acting as kind of guardian angels. One more New Age example, Whiteley Strieber popularized the modern image of the gray alien. He wrote Breakthrough in 1995. 3 years prior, with an open door and a giant gray alien behind it, most likely to evoke close encounters of the third kind. It's reminiscent of Lane's Alien Behind Her Door. The book does not frame aliens as biological organisms arriving in spacecrafts. He repeatedly describes them as existing in reality that overlaps ours, sometimes appearing physical, and sometimes more like consciousness interacting with consciousness. They are also similar to guardian angels. This made his book very popular with members of the New Age crowd, maybe Theosophic crowd, who believe that the world operates in layers. Lane name drops the 1995 book Breakthrough, or at least the word breakthrough, 10 seconds into the show's runtime. Unless, and this is a possibility, a strong possibility, that's a reference to breaking through to the other side of the wire or something like that. No matter how you see it, Lain serves a similar role to Arisu as an Earth Coincidences Control Officer or a Mahatma, or altering the course of Arisu's fate, so she ends up with the teacher at the end. Great. Lain at the end of the story is an archetypical guardian angel and a godlike being of immense power. At one point, she claims to be a program capable of unifying the real world and the wired. She might be an alien or an angel or a harbinger of the end of the world.
So happens I kissed an angel. Huh?
Wired is not a computer thing. She's not really a program. Rather, she has the ability to change reality, like Shiva shaping Prologue, or Jesus bringing about the end of the world. But she is no god that I'm aware of. Lain does have the power of God, or an angel, or alien, or in some UFO circles, these are all one and the same. Lain could be understood as something equivalent to an angel, which makes sense as her job is to correct things that go wrong by resetting the flow and direction of time. But Irie says at one point that she is an archetype of a heroine from a higher plane of reality that informed myth.
You were the legend of the Wired, cast in the role of the heroine in all the Wired's fairy tales.
Prior to this, Irie calls himself a person who does not believe in God. Perhaps he is referencing religion and myth as fairy tales, and Lain as the mold for all these things in the collective imagination, the collective consciousness as an archetype of a heroine of these myths, myths being popular religion. Her father also refers to Irie as someone who has the same kind of power that is written in myths.
I really don't know whether or not it should actually be called a god per se, but at the very least, I think it has the same kind of supernatural power that is written of in the old myths and legends.
So it would seem that the Knights deny old religion as true religion, and they perceive that all religion are made from collective archetypes, collective molds of each other, brought about by the collective unconsciousness. So Lain is a god, but she isn't a specific god. She's an archetype of a god that informed other gods that became religions. So Lain is a girl with no identity, no name, no race, no place, no position, no family, no friends, no nature, no culture, no religion, no mother, no sister, and 2 fathers who grew her in a lab. She comes from the psychic energies of dozens of dead kids to give her a body of artificial ribosomes from this black box which holds software from a UFO crash from Roswell, New Mexico in America. This alien spacecraft came from the Wired, or rather what is called the astral plane, or rather the etheric realm of the astral plane. All at the behest of Tachibana General Labs, which is a lab that is very, I don't know, general. So what aliens do here in the etheric realm is oversee human evolution, acting as sort of guardian angels. And that's my best guess as to who Lain is. In the end, Lain resets the world to a state where she no longer exists. She sacrifices herself for everyone else. What remains for her is a world reconstructed from memories of her previous existence. When Lain deletes herself from everyone's memory, she is symbolically dead and enters a kind of purgatory. She has to confront her shadow self that wants her to act recklessly with her powers. Lain's shadow argues that Lain should become God, but only God in a detached, isolated sense, existing outside the world, free from judgment. This Lain rejects ideas of responsibility or connection, encouraging her to do nothing for others and to endlessly reset reality. Lain recognizes that this perspective resembles Masumi Irie and denies it. Lain chooses to be completely alone rather than misusing her powers and doing what Irie did. This transition is symbolized through imagery of water dropping into an endless sea, echoing the Bhagavad Gita, where the soul is described as a drop of water in the ocean. We talked about this. A sonar sound echoes a desire for connection. Throughout the show, Lain encounters lower and higher spiritual forms, which explains why she perceives her father as a kind of ideal figure at the end of the show, equivalent to a god, while her father exists as a lesser form in the material realm. In Theosophy, material things are not ultimately the things in themselves. In the material world, as we see it, we are lower expressions of higher patterns of ideas. Serial Experiments Lain and Alice in Cyberland and her friends are incredibly spiritually powerful, as they are able to metaphorize their whole bodies into their respective networks with ease. Other Cyberland inhabitants are only shadows of people. Similarly, when Lain metaphorizes her body, she is seen as something more enlightened than the other inhabitants, the other netizens, as she is able to transform her entire body into the system, but at the end of the day, she's still in spiritual bondage. In the first episode of Serial Experiments Lain, Lain waits for her father to come home. She sits in her darkened room and sees a bright trail moving across the ceiling, casting animal-shaped shadows as he pulls into her driveway. These shadows resemble the imagery of the cave in Plato's allegory of the cave. The shadows on the cave walls are only reflections of real objects, which themselves are imperfect copies of higher forms. Lain can be read as unenlightened here, still trapped in her cave or her room and perceiving only shadows. The netizens in the Wired are also shadows, unable to cast their full selves. People must break their spiritual bondage and rise out of their cave and see the light. And that's what Lain does. In the final episode, we again see a glow coming from above that echoes this light refraction, showing us a higher form of her father and leading Lain to enlightenment out of her hikikomori shadows. When Lain sees God, she perceives him through her memory of her father as an archetype of a heavenly father. Upon meeting her father, she becomes enlightened, which means loving everyone here. By this point, Lain has taken on the role of a spiritual guardian, guiding human evolution as an angel or a ECCO or whatever you want it to be. In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, Proust, who narrates the book, recalls a forgotten memory after tasting a madeleine dipped in tea. Lain, after her conversation with her father, suggests that they should have madeleines and tea next time. A print ad even shows them eating tea and madeleines, clearly referencing Proust. The point is that Lain's father is God as a memory drawn from the Akashic record, just as Proust gets a rush of memories from dipping madeleines in tea. This seems to be the opposite of the earlier westernized motif of Western food. This is a reference to one of the most important pieces of Western literature of the 20th century, with Western food here, but it's still in service of cultural memory, culminating in spiritual connection and connection to family and God. When Lain reconnects with her father, she is able to take off her bear costume as a way to escape this, platonic cave and step into the light, experiencing universal love, including the love of her heavenly father. Thank you so much, Andrew Clemens, Friend Head, Hamther, Glorious Cook, Willie Dixon, Stephen T. Buffkin, and AV Flux. Thank you so much for supporting me on Patreon. If you like what I am doing here, you can follow me on Patreon. I'll start updating more and more on that. I'm very lazy with that. If you can't do that, you can like or subscribe or whatever. Next time we'll be talking about maybe the Serial Experiments Lain game and manga, maybe, which are somehow even more confusing and esoteric. So maybe I need to take a break from this. Until then, I'm going to go outside. That's also a message of the show. Maybe I should go outside. Maybe I should touch grass. Anyways, good night.
I'm the thing they blame for recession and social problems.